Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're unpacking a truly fascinating text that presents a highly radical and frankly controversial premise regarding Japan's economic and spiritual future. We're diving into a source that boldly claims the only way to save a nation drowning in debt is to completely reinvent its relationship with capitalism. It's a provocative read for sure, and one that really forces us to question the balance between government support and individual responsibility. Okay, let's just dive right into this. Right off the bat, the source text hits us with a startling central question, one that totally challenges our everyday assumptions. I mean, we usually think of Japan as this titan of global capitalism, right? Well, the text throws a massive curveball by asking, is Japan actually the world's last great socialist state? It's a shocking way to frame it. But as we break this down, you're going to see exactly how the author pieces together this heavily debated argument. So, here is our blueprint for today. We'll start with the collapsing socialist state, then move to the philosophy of Seki Shoidai, rethinking social security, transport and industry, and finally, agriculture and education. All right, let's jump straight into part one, the collapsing last socialist state. The source text literally dubs Japan the last socialist state that is currently collapsing. Now, the core argument here is that an over-reliance on the government, essentially expecting the state to manage almost every aspect of civic life, has fundamentally compromised Japan's capitalist foundations. The author argues that while communist states like the Soviet Union collapsed loudly and publicly, Japan silently morphed into a system that mirrors those socialist ideals of total state care. And according to the text, this is blinding the public to an impending economic disaster. Backing up the text's severe diagnosis is a mathematical crisis. Think about this number, 900 trillion yen. That is the staggering national debt explicitly mentioned in the source material at the time it was written. The text points to this massive figure to argue that this so-called socialist system of heavy government expenditure is simply a mathematical impossibility in the long run. I mean, you just can't spend drastically more than you earn year after year without eventually hitting a brick wall. And building on that, the source makes the startling assertion that expecting the state to manage your post-retirement life completely is a dangerous, unsustainable illusion. It argues that a system where the government is expected to fully take care of everyone over the age of 65 is essentially a complete communist ideal, and it's one that, in the author's view, is actively causing the nation to suffer because it simply cannot be funded. Which brings us to the proposed solution in Part 2, Capitalism's Origin, or Seki Shoidai. The source argues we have to return to a very specific, traditional mindset, Seki Shoidai. This is a principle famously attributed to the historical Japanese philosopher Sontoku Ninomiya. It translates roughly to the idea that accumulating small, diligent efforts inevitably leads to great success. The text views this exact concept as the true missing spirit of a functional capitalist society. It's essentially the ultimate rejection of getting something for nothing. The text really emphasizes Sontoku Ninomiya's spirit of diligence, ingenuity, and just continuous, grinding effort. The author is calling for a profound return to these traditional values. The argument being made is that true national prosperity doesn't come from government handouts, but from the gritty, relentless effort and self-help of individual citizens, people who are willing to grit their teeth and build wealth step by step. Let's see how that applies to policy in Part 3, the restoration from Social Security. The author presents a really stark dichotomy for us here. On one hand, you have what the text calls the socialist dream, which is the expectation of total state care for things like pensions and medical expenses. On the other hand, you have the capitalist reality. This insists that citizens absolutely must abandon their reliance on taxes to save them in old age. Instead, they need to embrace self-defense, proper life planning, and rigorous personal savings. To emphasize just how radical this shift needs to be, the source uses a brilliant, striking historical analogy. It calls for a modern Taisei Hokan, which history buffs will recognize as the great return of political power that ended the shogunate in Japan. By using this specific term, the author is advocating for a total dismantling of heavy state welfare systems, effectively returning the power and responsibility of survival back to the individual. It's a dramatic call to completely rewrite the modern social contract. Moving on to the broader economic strategy in Part 4, fusing transport revolution and new industry. The author lays out a fascinating domino effect strategy that they claim will bring immense wealth back to regional areas. It's a clear four-step sequence. Step 1, build advanced transportation, specifically linear motor cars. Step 2, use that technology to completely change the accessibility of rural Japan. Step 3. Lure in factories and businesses with really bold tax incentives. And Step 4. Use this brand new infrastructure to aggressively foster a culture of local entrepreneurship. The text places a very specific emphasis on the linear Shinkansen. For the author, this isn't just a fast train. It's the primary physical catalyst for a complete transportation revolution. The argument is that high-speed connectivity will totally erase the geographical disadvantages of rural areas. It's like turning previously overlooked distant regions into prime real estate for new industries overnight.
But high-speed trains aren't enough on their own. The author insists on sweeping structural changes to make these newly connected regions attractive to private industry. This involves massive deregulation, offering major tax breaks so it's actually cheaper for companies to build factories in the Japanese countryside than overseas, and, this is crucial, forcing local government bureaucrats to adopt an entrepreneurial, business-first mindset.
Now for the final piece of the puzzle. Part 5. Innovations in Agriculture and Education. The text launches a heavy critique on current defensive farming practices. It argues that a lot of farming is done mostly by part-time farmers who are just holding on to land for inheritance tax purposes. The text demands a complete pivot to aggressive, high-tech, and highly profitable agriculture that creates premium products the rest of the world desperately wants to buy. To make this concept concrete, the source highlights the cultivation of luxury, high-sugar, perfectly ripe sweet tomatoes. The author points out that if you create an agricultural product with incredibly high quality and status appeal, people will pay top dollar for it, literally just like they do for luxury suits or high-end watches. It's all about transitioning to what they call value-added agriculture. But agriculture isn't the only sector the text puts on the chopping block. The source uses uncompromising language, stating that all sacred cows must be systematically dismantled and reviewed. And when it comes to sacred cows, the author takes direct aim at the traditional state-run public education system, arguing that it is fundamentally failing to produce the kind of sharp entrepreneurial minds the country needs. This leads to perhaps one of the most highly controversial proposals in the entire text. The author suggests we should formally recognize practical, high-level learning that is happening outside the public school system. Specifically, the text argues that top-tier private cram schools should actually be certified as official schools. This would allow kids to bypass the traditional public school grind, get a highly effective education, and significantly reduce their overall time burden. To ground this radical educational theory in reality, the source actually names famous, elite Japanese cram schools, specifically pointing out Sapex and Yotsuya Otsuka. The argument is that these institutions are already providing a higher quality, more advanced education than standard elementary schools. So, the author says, the government should just acknowledge reality and grant them official school status. So, let's just zoom out for a second and summarize the core takeaways from this explainer. The author's blueprint for saving a heavily indebted Japan intertwines spiritual philosophy directly with hardline economic policy. It demands abandoning state reliance in favor of individual self-help. It requires embracing the Sekishoi Dai spirit of diligent, incremental effort. And on a practical level, it calls for executing radical, unapologetic deregulation across welfare, transport, agriculture, and even education. We've definitely covered a lot of ground today, unpacking a text that doesn't just suggest minor tweaks, but demands a total societal overhaul. It leaves us with a truly provocative question to ponder. Is this extreme return to raw self-reliance and deregulation the only way to save a heavily indebted nation from mathematical collapse? It's a stark vision, for sure, but it's one that forces us to deeply evaluate what we expect from our society, and more importantly, what we expect from ourselves. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and keep questioning the systems around you.